Samantha had always been different. While other teenage girls obsessed over the latest fashion trends, her heart raced for something else: infantile clothing. She spent hours browsing online forums, seeking out the softest onesies, the cutest pacifiers, and most importantly, the perfect diaper. Her friends would never understand, so she kept her secret hidden, a dark desire locked away. When she stumbled upon a post about a magical diaper, her pulse quickened. The description promised an experience like no other, a transformation beyond her wildest dreams. It was expensive, but she didn't care. She had to have it. She clicked buy now without a second thought, her fingers trembling with excitement. Days turned into weeks, and her anticipation grew. She tracked the package obsessively, counting down the minutes until it arrived. Finally, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. There it was, wrapped in plain brown paper, unassuming yet brimming with potential. She tore it open, her eyes widening at the sight of the pristine white diaper within. This was it. Her moment had come. Samantha waited until the house was silent. Her parents were out and she was alone. She locked her bedroom door, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and began to undress, her hands shaking with anticipation. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a small lamp on her bedside table. Samantha stood in front of her full-length mirror, holding the diaper in her hands. It felt soft and thick, just as she had imagined. She swallowed hard, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. She unbuttoned her jeans, letting them fall to the floor. Her shirt followed, and soon she stood there in just her underwear, feeling exposed, yet exhilarated. She took one last look at herself in the mirror, committing the image to memory. With trembling hands, she unfolded the diaper and laid it out on her bed. She sat down, feeling the coolness of the plastic against her skin. Slowly, she lifted her legs and pulled the diaper up, fastening the tape securely around her waist. It fit perfectly, snug yet comfortable. She stood up, looking at herself in the mirror once more. The sight sent a thrill through her body. She walked around her room, getting used to the sensation. The diaper crinkled with each step, a constant reminder of her new reality. She couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of fulfillment she'd never known before. She was finally where she belonged. Samantha lay down on her bed, her heart still racing. She reached down, her fingers grazing the front of the diaper. A shiver ran through her body, the sensation more intense than she had anticipated. She began to rub gently, her breath coming in short gasps. The pleasure was overwhelming, unlike anything she had ever felt before. As she continued, the room around her seemed to fade. Her world narrowed to the feeling of the diaper against her skin and the waves of ecstasy coursing through her. She closed her eyes, losing herself in the moment. Time seemed to stand still and she felt as if she were floating. Suddenly she felt a strange tightening sensation around her waist. She opened her eyes, confused. The diaper seemed to be shrinking, the tapes pulling tighter and tighter. Panic set in as she tried to remove it, but it wouldn't budge. Her fingers fumbled with the tapes, but they were stuck fast. She sat up, the room spinning around her. The pleasure was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. She tugged at the diaper, but it was as if it had become a part of her. She was trapped, unable to free herself from its grasp. Section 4. Unshakable Bind. Desperation clawed at her as she struggled with the diaper. Each attempt to remove it proved futile, and the tightening continued. It was as if the diaper had a mind of its own, determined to stay attached. Her hands trembled, tears welling up in her eyes. She had never felt so helpless. She looked around her room, seeking something, anything that could help, but there was nothing. The walls seemed to close in on her, the space growing smaller by the second. Her breath came in ragged gasps, fear gripping her heart. She was alone, with no one to turn to. The tightening was relentless, and she felt a strange sensation in her chest. She looked down, her eyes widening in horror as she saw her body changing. Her chest was shrinking, her curves disappearing. She felt herself growing smaller, the world around her expanding. She stumbled to the mirror, watching in disbelief as her reflection transformed. She was no longer a teenager, she was a tween, her body awkward and unfamiliar. The diaper still clung to her, an ever-present reminder of her predicament. She reached out, her fingers touching the glass, but the reflection was real. She was changing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Section 5. The Shrinking World. Samantha's panic escalated as the changes continued. She watched helplessly as her body became that of a child, her limbs shortening, her features softening. The diaper remained snug, almost mocking her inability to remove it. She tried to walk, but her legs felt weak and unsteady. The room seemed vast, the furniture towering over her. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of her bed. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the full extent of her transformation. She was a child again, trapped in a body that didn't belong to her. She knew she had to find her parents. They would know what to do. She forced herself to move, each step a struggle. The hallway seemed endless, the door to her parents' room miles away. She called out, her voice high-pitched and feeble, but there was no answer. She was alone in this nightmare. With a final burst of energy, she reached her parents' door and pushed it open. The room was empty. Desperation surged through her, and she collapsed on the floor, sobbing. She needed help, but there was no one to turn to. The diaper felt like a prison, confining her to this helpless state. Section 6. Pleas and Final Regression. Samantha's sobs echoed through the empty house. She crawled to her parents' bed, pulling herself up with effort. She clutched the blanket, her tiny hands shaking. The diaper tightened further, and she felt herself growing even smaller. She was becoming a toddler, her body regressing with each passing second. She cried out, her voice barely more than a wail. "Mummy, Daddy, help me!" But there was no response. Her tears fell freely, her sobs racking her small frame. She struggled to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her weight. She was too young, too weak. The diaper seemed to envelop her, providing a perverse sense of comfort. It was soft and warm, a cruel contrast to her terror. She could feel her mind slipping, her thoughts becoming simpler, more infantile. She clung to the last remnants of her awareness, but it was a losing battle. With a final desperate plea, she called out once more, "Help me!" But her voice was a mere whisper. She collapsed onto the bed, unable to move. The transformation was complete. She was a toddler, her body too young and fragile to stand. The diaper was her only solace, a twisted reminder of her dark obsession.